Hey there, welcome to Night Lectures, your daily dose of fascinating stories. Before Europe learned about the existence of America, on the other side of the world, millions of people were already living. They had cities, armies, temples, and roads. But one mistake, the mistake of a single man, forever changed their fate. In this video, we will tell you how Columbus was not actually looking for America, and did not even know that he had found it. Why his expedition was called mad, and who nonetheless dared to give him ships. What he saw when he first stepped onto the shore of the new continent. How after his voyage wars, epidemics, and the disappearance of entire civilizations began. And why, centuries later, his name became a symbol not only of discovery but also of destruction. This is not just a story about geography. It is a tale of how greed, faith, and curiosity could rewrite the map of the world and the fates of millions of people. Share your ideas for future videos in the comments and hit the subscribe button. New bedtime stories come out here daily. Before Europe pronounced the word America, it already existed. Not as empty land or a nameless continent awaiting discovery, but as a complex and living world inhabited by tens of millions of people. Here were civilizations, empires, and laws of their own. In the north, in the valleys of the future United States, tribes built earth mounds as high as multi-storied houses. They traded, cultivated crops, and kept rituals passed down for centuries. Further south rose the cities of the Maya, with hieroglyphs on temple walls and star maps carved on stone slabs. On the Mexican plateau, the Aztec Empire grew with markets where thousands gathered daily, with an army, a palace, schools, a water supply system, and laws written out by categories of crime. And further south, in the mountains of the Andes, the Inca Empire developed. Without writing, yet with a perfect network of roads, a record-keeping system on knotted cords, and centralized administration that spanned thousands of kilometers. America before Columbus was not a myth of savage tribes. It was living societies, where people married, quarreled, prayed, fought, and healed. Each people had its own gods, its own legends, its own explanations of the order of the world. They were not the same. Somewhere they believed in an underworld of the dead, elsewhere, in kinship with animals, and elsewhere still, in the great sun. But in one thing, they were alike. None of them knew that across the ocean there was another world unknown to them. And Europe, it knew, or at least it suspected. For the medieval European imagination, the world ended either with the sea or with a wall of sand. At best, with a cliff where monsters and black winds dwelled. But closer to the 15th century, fear of the horizon slowly began to give way to interest. It all started with the East. In the Middle Ages, the East was synonymous with wealth. From India and China came pepper, cinnamon, silk, jade, sugar, and porcelain. But the path was long and dangerous. Caravans crossed dozens of borders, each ruler demanding his toll. After Constantinople was seized by the Ottoman Empire, this path became nearly inaccessible. The Portuguese, obsessed with the idea of rounding Africa, for decades pushed further south along its coast. They built trading posts, sailed on, calculating that someday they would turn east and reach India by sea. It was a path of real calculations through capes, monsoons, harbors, dangers. It demanded patience and money. But there was another thought, bolder and less tested. What if the earth really was round, and the way to India lay not east, but west? This seemed madness. Many scholars did believe the earth was a sphere, but they thought the ocean between Europe and Asia was far too vast. Yet there were some who believed the waters between Europe and Asia might not be so great. Perhaps somewhere there, land existed. In those years, legends circulated in Europe of wondrous islands beyond the horizon, of holy lands, of golden cities with jewel-covered roofs and rivers full of spices. Tales were told of St. Brendan, who had supposedly sailed across the ocean and reached Eden. There were also stories of Vikings who once found Vinland, a rich land across the sea. These rumors were not used as maps, but they nourished imagination. The fewer the facts, the stronger the myths. They did not hinder but pushed forward. Where knowledge failed, hope replaced fear. Within that hope, the idea lived that the ocean could be crossed, that on the far shore would be land, that it was possible not to perish, but to become rich. At that moment, fear and greed began to work together. Fear of being cut off from sources of goods, of being left on the sidelines of world trade, greed to gain direct access without intermediaries, and also vanity. Whoever would secure his own trade route would become the strongest power. Curiosity, greed, fear, and legend merged. Some sought gold, some wished to find the boundaries of the world, others to prove that the horizon was not a barrier. Thus arose the demand for a map that did not yet exist, first in minds, then on paper, then in ports, and finally, in sails. Everything that happened afterward became the consequence of expectations, guesses, illusions, and faith that beyond the horizon there was not emptiness, but opportunity. The opportunity to see what could not be seen from here. The opportunity to be the first to reach a shore that no one yet knew by name. And while on the other side of the ocean people harvested crops, hunted, prayed, and offered sacrifices to their gods, in Europe the first expedition was already being prepared. The worlds did not yet know of each other, but soon their collision would change them both. In the year 1492, Europe stood at the threshold of a new stage. In Spain, the Reconquista was completed. The last Moorish stronghold, Granada, had fallen. The Catholic monarchs, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, had finally united the country, replenished the treasury, and begun to think of the future. In that same year, a man once again appeared at the Spanish court, one who for many years had tried to convince the kings of a single idea. The way to India could be found by sailing west. His name was Christopher Columbus. He was born in Genoa, in the family of a humble weaver. In youth, he went to sea, worked as a merchant, studied maps, and drew navigation charts himself. He had no university education, but he possessed rare persistence. His idea, in essence, was based on a mistake. He severely underestimated the size of the earth and did not know that between Europe and Asia lay an entire continent. But he believed, if one sailed out of Spain and kept a steady course west, one could reach the shores of Asia. At first he was mocked. His ideas were rejected in Portugal. In England and France he was not even heard. Only in Spain did he eventually find support, not immediately, but through persistence. A key role was played by a monk named Juan Perez, who persuaded Queen Isabella to give Columbus one more chance. She agreed. A contract was signed. Columbus received the title of Admiral, the right to govern future lands, and a share of all the wealth he would find. In May, preparations began. 3 small ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Niña, stood in the port of Palos de la Frontera. They were modest in size, without serious protection, not designed for long ocean voyages. The crew was recruited with difficulty. People were afraid. Rumors said that beyond the horizon lay emptiness, a cliff, monsters, magnets that could rip the nails from the planks. In the end, a crew was gathered, most not by choice. Some went to avoid prison, others because they were promised pardon or money. The sailors did not know exactly where they were sailing. They were told, to India. But the map they followed was only conjecture. No one before them had crossed that route. On the morning of the 3rd of August, 1492, the flotilla sailed out to sea. The farewell was brief. No salutes, no songs. No one believed they would return. First their course took them to the Canary Islands. There they resupplied and repaired the Pinta. Its rudder had broken before even leaving Spain. Then they went into the open ocean. This was the part of the route no one knew. With each week the horizon remained empty, the wind unchanged, the sun relentless. The men grew uneasy. Many began to scratch the days under the ship's walls. Some begged to turn back. Columbus kept a diary but recorded reduced distances, so the crew would think they had not gone too far from home. Each night they stared at the sky. No signs told them the way was correct. No familiar shore, no passing boat. Sometimes birds settled on the water, sometimes seaweed floated by. Columbus said this was a sign. Land was near, but land did not appear. Once strange lightning was seen in the sky. At evening, the compass behaved oddly. Its needle shifted. Some thought they were lost, that the world beyond the edge was already breaking apart. One sailor said perhaps the ocean was endless. Columbus was silent, but inside he too doubted. After a month, unrest grew. The sailors spoke of mutiny. They were exhausted. They did not understand where they were. They had no map, only the captain's faith and the ocean's silence. Columbus promised, if in a few days no land appeared, they would turn back. And yet, on the 10th of October, birds began circling more often above the ships. On the morning of the 11th of October, branches and broken trees floated on the water. And at night, around 2 o'clock, from the watch came the cry, land. They did not know what they had found. They did not know that it was not Asia. But for them it was the end of the journey. They had crossed seas that were on no map. And now they stood before a shore that would forever change the course of history. On the morning of the 12th of October, 1492, as the sun slowly rose above the horizon, Columbus's 3 ships approached the coast of unknown land. The watchman from the Pinta first saw a shadow on the water, then the silhouettes of trees. Columbus ordered the boats lowered. He wore ceremonial dress, held the flag of Castile, carried a letter from the Queen, and believed he had reached Asia. They landed on one of the Bahama Islands, the name given by the natives Columbus recorded as Guanahani. He did not understand their language, but this did not disturb him. He was sure this was one of the islands near the coast of India. Later he would write in his diary that the island was inhabited by kind, gentle people, without weapons, easily submissive. That first day Columbus raised the flag of Spain, declaring these lands the property of the Catholic monarchs. He did not ask the locals whose lands they considered the island to be. He thought he had arrived at lands destined to be opened and taken under his governance. The natives came to the shore. They had no metal, no clothing in the usual sense. They offered gifts, feathers, beads, food. They did not understand who these men with white skin and iron things were. And they certainly did not know that with their arrival, everything would change. Columbus took their gesture as recognition of authority. He decided they were Indians because he thought he was in India. This name would remain with them forever, despite the geographical mistake. In the following days, the flotilla moved from island to island. They searched for gold. Columbus was not interested in climate, culture, or customs, but in where the mines were, where treasures were extracted, which peoples wore ornaments. He pointed at objects, gestured. They answered, but he interpreted freely. On one island, he met people with small gold pendants. They explained that further south there were lands with more gold. Columbus remembered. He wrote, "If these people know gold, then there is much of it here. If they do not resist, then they can be converted to Christianity and used for labor." His first impression of the locals was double-edged. On one hand, he wrote that they were hospitable, open, unarmed. On the other, that they could easily be made servants and taught Spanish. He saw not allies, but resources. Meanwhile, the crew adjusted to the new shores. They tasted unknown fruits for the first time, encountered plants they had never seen. There was tobacco, there was potato, parrots, palms, and heat they were not used to. Many marveled and at the same time felt fear. The land was beautiful, but strange. Columbus wrote there were no dangerous animals, no cities, no armies. He was mistaken. He had simply not yet reached the places where strong societies lived. He was on the edge of the continent but thought he had reached its heart. He wrote that all was under control, that the natives recognized his power, that the mission was near success. In truth, he did not understand their language, their politics, their beliefs. He did not know this was only the first step. That ahead lay the islands of the Caribbean, and then the mainland with millennia of history. He did not know this world was far more complex than it seemed from the shore. The ships sailed on. In November, they reached Cuba. Columbus was sure this was the mainland. He sent a group inland to find palaces and temples. They found neither. But they returned with accounts of a wondrous plant that locals smoked. Its leaves were dried, rolled into tubes, and set alight. Thus, Europe first learned of tobacco, Then came Hispaniola, the island today divided between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. There Columbus decided to build the first settlement. Before his eyes, the Santa Maria ran aground and wrecked. From its remains, a fort was built. There several dozen men stayed, the first European colony in America. Columbus returned to Spain with the rest. He carried a little gold, exotic items, several captured natives, and above all, news. He believed he had reached India, that the route was open, that trade could now begin. In his letters he wrote of wondrous lands, kind people, and a great mission. He did not know that with his first steps he had laid the foundation for a long chain of invasions. He did not know that after the first gifts would come cannons, and after missionaries, soldiers. He did not know that for these islands this was not discovery, but the beginning of the end. When Columbus returned to Spain in the spring of 1493, he found himself at the center of attention. He was greeted as the man who had opened a new way to India, although in truth he had not understood where exactly he had been. His ship docked at ports with cages holding people of dark skin and feathers in their hair. In the holds there were baskets of maize, cotton, sparkling stones, unusual fruits, and bright parrots. But most of all, the golden pendants attracted attention, even though there were only a few of them. The royal court received him with honors. They called him the Admiral of the Ocean Sea, and his stories were recorded with admiration. He reported that he had discovered many islands, rich in nature and suitable for conversion to Christianity. He assured them that the gold in those lands was incomparably more than what he had managed to bring. He swore that if they gave him more ships and more men, he would reveal inexhaustible treasures. Isabella and Ferdinand believed him. His promises matched their hopes. Power, money, glory, all of this was within reach. He was allowed to organize a second expedition. But now, everything was different. The first time, he had sailed with 3 modest ships. The second time, with a flotilla of 17 vessels and more than 1,000 men on board. Among them were not explorers, but artisans, soldiers, officials, priests. This was no longer an expedition. It was colonization. They set out in the autumn of 1493. Soon they arrived at Hispaniola, where a garrison had been left. But the fort, built from the wreckage of the Santa Maria, lay in ruins. Those who had stayed behind were dead. The reasons are not precisely known. Perhaps a quarrel with the locals, perhaps an internal feud. Columbus decided to begin anew. He founded a new settlement, La Navidad, and then another, Isabella. He tried to establish administration, enforce control, and organize gold mining. But there was little gold. The ornaments the locals wore bore no relation to real deposits. He sent detachments deep into the island, collected information, but great discoveries did not come. Nevertheless, he continued to believe, or pretended to believe, in mountains of gold. He used force. He set quotas for gold collection, demanded that the natives bring him a certain measure of grains. For failure, punishments. There appeared the first chains, the first hangings, the first uprisings. Meanwhile, in Spain, they awaited results. They expected gold. They expected ships full of riches. Instead came news of disorder, of poor governance, of cruelties. Complaints began. Among the settlers, dissatisfaction grew. There was not enough food, diseases spread, discipline collapsed. Columbus could not cope. He was a sailor, not an administrator. He did not know how to govern a colony, how to resolve conflicts, how to build stable relations with the natives. He believed that he would find gold, and that this would solve all problems. He was mistaken. He went on, exploring new islands. He reached Jamaica, part of Cuba, and coasts further south. Everywhere he looked for signs of India, spices, aromatic scents, quotations from Marco Polo. He asked the natives if they had a king, if they had elephants, if they had peppers. They did not understand what he wanted. He did not understand that before him stood an entirely different world. Despite the chaos, in 1496 he returned once again to Spain, this time without triumph. Rumors of cruelty, executions, and failures trailed behind him. He was still received, but now with restraint. His authority began to crack. Yet he pleaded, Give me one more chance. He promised once again to find what did not exist. The third expedition in 1498 brought him to the shores of South America, the mouth of the Orinoco. There, for the first time, Columbus began to suspect that perhaps he was not in Asia. The river was too mighty, the plants too unfamiliar, the people too different. In his letters he wrote, "I feel that this land is part of paradise." But publicly, he did not renounce his theory. He could not admit error. Meanwhile, on Hispaniola, a crisis was mounting. The Spaniards demanded power. The natives rebelled. Complaints went straight to Madrid. In the year 1500, the monarch sent an official with special orders to arrest Columbus and bring him to Spain. He was chained. Thus ended his rule over the colony. He was freed, but he never again received true support. In 1502, he set out to sea once more. This was his final expedition. He reached the coasts of Central America, searching for a passage to the Indian Ocean, vainly hoping to prove his theory correct. He found no passage, no gold, no city. His ships were battered by storms. He spent months in isolation, awaiting rescue. In 1504, he returned to Spain, old, ill, deceived by his own illusions. He asked to have his promises, his titles, his shares restored. But Queen Isabella was dead, and Ferdinand no longer listened. Columbus died 2 years later, never knowing that he had not opened a new way to Asia, but had revealed an entire continent. His life became a symbol of the double-edged beginning of a new era. He had sought spices and palaces, but found wild shores. He had promised gold, but brought violence. He had thought he held a map, but found himself on foreign soil without a compass. And yet, his voyage became a starting point. Ahead lay conquistadors, diseases, ships, wars, treaties, colonies. But first on that stage stepped a man who sought one thing, found another, and never understood what exactly he had opened. The discovery of America was not simply a new line in navigation diaries. It triggered a chain reaction no one had predicted. What began as a search for a route to India turned into a complete reshaping of the world. Geography changed its outlines. Maps were rewritten. But above all, the very logic of history shifted. After Columbus's return, the race began. Following the Spaniards, the Portuguese, the English, the French rushed into the New World. Some with royal decrees, others with private greed. Some wanted gold, others land, and others souls. Each wanted something, and each believed he had the right. Spain quickly split the world in half. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed. By it, all lands west of a notional line went to Spain, all east to Portugal. The local inhabitants were not asked. They took no part in the negotiations. Their existence was counted as part of the natural landscape, like forests, rivers, and ore. On the islands of the Caribbean, new settlements began to grow. Each new governor promised greater revenues. Gold became the goal, the meaning, the measure. Where it was not found, people were forced to labor. Where it was found, they were killed for refusing to share. Local communities collapsed. Some fled, others fought, others surrendered. None of these strategies saved them. After Columbus came others. Hernán Cortés landed in Mexico in 1519. He had a little more than 600 soldiers. The Aztecs had an army, a capital, rituals, walls, temples. And yet, Tenochtitlan fell. Why? Because the Spaniards were cruel? Yes. Because they had weapons? Also. But most of all, because with them came what no one had expected. Viruses. Smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus, diseases unknown in the New World. The natives had no immunity. A single infected person, and thousands died. Sometimes entire villages vanished in mere weeks. This was not war in the usual sense. It was an epidemic hidden in fabrics and in breath. By the estimates of historians, by the middle of the 16th century, the native population of the Caribbean islands had shrunk by 90%. Meanwhile, ships brought trophies to Europe: ingots, fabrics, exotic fruits, shells, tobacco, natives in chains. The old world eagerly absorbed all that was new. Oranges and maize became common. Potatoes entered the diet of the poor. And with them came faith that at the edge of the world lay an inexhaustible resource. Spain became the first global empire. Gold from America filled its treasury, but with it came conflicts, corruption, and religious intolerance. On conquered lands, churches were built, but beside them, camps. Forced Christianization advanced. Those who refused baptism became slaves. The system of encomienda allowed Spaniards to care for the natives while claiming the right to their labor. In practice, it was a form of slavery. Soon, there were not enough natives. Then the next stage began, the importation of Africans. Slaves were carried across the Atlantic while sugar, tobacco, and gold were sent back. Thus arose the triangle of death: Europe, Africa, America. But even those who did not participate in conquest directly felt the change. In England, fleets were built. In France, trading companies were founded. New markets, new spices, new diseases, new beliefs appeared. The world economy began to form not in theory, but on the decks of ships. And what of America itself? Their languages disappeared, temples crumbled, manuscripts burned. Where cities once stood, now there were pastures. People who for centuries had lived by their own laws suddenly became subjects of a foreign king. Their gods were forbidden, their bodies no longer their own. The conquistadors who came after Columbus no longer pretended to be explorers. They came as conquerors, with a cross in one hand and a sword in the other. They carried manifestos, papal bulls, royal charters. They invoked God, but acted in the name of gold. Each sought to become a new Columbus, not in geography, but in profit. In Europe, his name became a symbol of victory. In America, a symbol of the end. The discovery became not a door into a new era, but a blow to the face of those who had already lived on that land. And yet it had all begun with a map that did not exist, with the idea that India was closer than it seemed, with the illusion that the earth was simply a globe with edges. But it turned out the earth was living people, and the discovery of their lands was not a neutral act, but an invasion. Columbus did not know what exactly he had begun, but his step became the first in a chain of events that cannot be washed away even now. For history is not only what is written in diaries, it is also what is burned, erased, forgotten. And in the case of America, it is the millions of voices that no one will ever hear again. With each passing decade after the first landing on the island of Guanahani, the meaning of the name Christopher Columbus became ever more symbolic. His real life, with all its failures, petitions, exiles, and losses, was gradually displaced by the image of the hero who had discovered the New World. His voyage was presented as a moment of triumph for the European spirit, courage, and faith. But was it truly so? Columbus died in the year 1506 in poverty and in obscurity. His titles had been stripped away. His income had been reduced. His son spent many years in legal disputes with the crown, demanding the return of what had been promised. He himself never learned that he had opened a new continent. Until the end of his life, he insisted that he had found a route to East Asia. Yet what he did not understand while alive became the foundation of a historical myth after his death. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as Europe was shaping its worldview, the figure of Columbus proved convenient. One man, one voyage, one date, 1492. It looked clear, striking, and impressive. The discovery of a continent was reduced to a single name. The complex reality in which millions of people were already living in America did not fit into that neat scheme. There was no place for the Maya, the Inca, the Cherokee, the Mohawk. Their history was too troubling, too contradictory. It was easier to omit it, and easier to elevate the figure of Columbus. In American schools of the 19th century, Columbus was taught as a founder. Cities, states, and universities were named after him. In the year 1792, 300 years after his first voyage, the first monuments were erected in the United States. In the 20th century, Columbus Day became an official holiday. That he had not discovered an empty land but had stepped upon it without permission was not mentioned. But time passed, and by the beginning of the 21st century, the myth began to crack. Historians ask questions. Why do we say discovered, if millions of people already lived here? Why do we celebrate the date from which the destruction of entire peoples began? Why do we ignore the consequences, calling this event only great? In Latin America, Columbus Day in some countries was renamed the Day of Indigenous Resistance. In other places, it was abolished entirely. Elsewhere, it was replaced with the Day of Cultural Diversity. People began to revise their views. Monuments became objects of dispute. Some saw in them memory, others symbols of injustice. But the issue is not even in the figure of Columbus. He became a screen onto which the meaning of an era is projected. He is like the cover of a book that few ever open. A whole continent was named after him, though he believed until his death that he was in India. America received its name from another man, the Florentine traveler Amerigo Vespucci, who was the first to suggest that this was a new, unknown continent. Columbus sought one thing, found another, and understood a third. But his voyage marked the beginning of a global exchange that changed climate, economy, agriculture, religion, and demography. Europe received potatoes, maize, tomatoes, and chocolate. America received diseases, slavery, iron, and the gospel. All this did not happen in a single day, nor in a single decade, but it began the moment when 3 ships drew near to the shore. Therefore, the question is not whether Columbus was a hero or a villain. The question is why we continue to tell this story as if it were simple, why we search in it for a single, unambiguous meaning, why we keep calling it a discovery, knowing that it cost some people their lives, their land, their names. History is not obliged to be comforting. At times it is harsh, at times cruel, at times illogical, but it is ours. And to understand how we came to where we are today, we must learn to see not only the heroes, but also those who disappeared from the pages of textbooks. Not only the path of the ship, but the trace it left on the shore. When in old European maps the borders of the unknown were reached, cartographers would write, "Here be dragons." It was an honest mark, an admission that mankind did not yet know what lay beyond the horizon. Not a myth, not an error, but fear and honesty. Fear because beyond the edge there could be an abyss, and honesty because beyond the edge there could be anything at all. Christopher Columbus sailed precisely there, beyond the edge of the map. He did not know what he would find. He thought he was moving toward Asia, but he arrived at another world. That world was not empty, not new, not forgotten. It was simply different. It had not awaited him, but he came. And he was not alone. Others followed. Some sought gold, some immortality, some merely a way home. But the step Columbus took became the first in a long chain of steps, each made with greater certainty and greater destruction. In the place of cultural exchange began struggle. Where there might have been alliances, there arose armies. Mutual wonder gave way to subjugation. People who met for the first time on a shore no longer saw each other as equals. Thus, step by step, one world swallowed another, first with iron, then with paper, then with forgetting. Yet even within these lines of pain, there was not only darkness. There emerged new forms of life, new ties, new peoples born at the junction of cultures. Those who survived became heirs to both worlds at once, European and American. Their songs, their words, their customs did not vanish. They simply changed in order not to perish. Today we say, Columbus discovered America. But perhaps it would be more accurate to say, Columbus collided with America. He did not create it, did not build it, did not invent it. He simply arrived. And history, as often happens, began not with intention, but with error. We live in a world where maps are already filled, where from space one can see continents, and satellites trace every bend of a river. But even today, beyond the limits of the known, there still lies something that cannot be drawn. Memory, consequences, shadows of old decisions, voices that never entered the chronicles, stories that did not begin with victory. If you close your eyes, you will not see a map. You will see the ocean, open, without shores, and 3 small ships sailing into the unknown. On their decks, fear, hope, false calculations, and faith. They do not know where they are going, but they go, because beyond the horizon, there is always something. That is how every story begins, with an empty edge, with a question, with a desire to know what lies beyond. And perhaps in this, there is not only error. Perhaps in this, there is humanity.